You know those stories that you start writing from a small idea and you just kind of keep writing, not really knowing why, but eventually, then you have this longer story than you thought from this one simple idea and it's all mostly subconscious? This is one of those stories. I had a Halloween video idea I wanted to do here, but I just didn't have time. So hopefully this will be a good thing you can listen to for a mildly spooky story, hopefully on Halloween. And if it is Halloween, happy Halloween to you. So here we go. We've all had recurring dreams. Some good, some bad. Most of the time, people talk about events that loop each time the dream happens. I guess I'm one of the lucky few that has one continuous nightmare. Like how the nightmare will change each time, but it's all in the same eerie world. And these dreams aren't limited to just when I'm sleeping. I work at a retail store that sells odds and ends for electronics. I've been a closer for as long as I've been there, but I don't mind. I'm a bit of a night owl myself. Wonderfully nocturnal, as I've been told. I get home late and get enough sleep, usually. Lately, I've been falling asleep later and later, and I know it's not healthy, but got to get things done, right? Anyway, the nightmare I'm talking about started around a month ago. I went to bed around 2 a.m. after an exhausting day. The covers a soft retreat from the cold. At some point, a loud thump woke me up, and I quickly opened my eyes. It sounded close. My door was behind me and around a corner. I slowly rolled out of bed and reached for my knife from the nightstand. But it wasn't there. Not only that, but the wood I was used to seemed rougher, colder than I remember. I looked down at my hand. The nightstand was replaced with a dark metal block. The bed material wasn't mahogany, but a rusty frame, loosely nailed together and topped with an uncovered mattress. My furniture was gone, and the walls were scratched deep and all over. The dim lighting from the small wall lights were a soft white that didn't help reveal anything remotely good. I walked up to the big metal door and looked carefully outside. Long, oblong hallways of rusted steel went on for miles in each direction I could see. The angles of the halls weren't quite right, some corners jutting out, walls dented in weird places human hands couldn't reach. The few exposed, hanging ceiling lights cast a dreadfully warm glow on the crimson-brown walls. The shadows were long and at unnatural angles. I retreated back behind the door and took a deep breath. This is a bad dream. This is a bad dream. I whispered this to myself repeatedly in hopes that my brain would either let me control the dream fully or I would wake up. I don't know why I was trying to stay quiet. I didn't see anyone else. But it was a dream, and I could never be so sure. I took a deep breath and stepped out into the hall again. I froze. At the end of the central hall stood a tall figure in a large brown trench coat and a fedora. A light was shining from in front of him. I held my breath. I never heard any footsteps. The figure slowly turned and revealed a lantern, the glow contouring a full-faced gas mask. I could barely hear a heavy breathing as he walked towards me slowly. The lantern raised. I backed up in vain as the door was now closed. I never closed it. I never heard it shut. My vision turned white. I woke up in my bed a few minutes before my alarm. I rushed to the door and looked out. I immediately rushed to my door, looked outside. A normal hallway in my house. I sighed. I either needed more sleep or a shrink, and one was expensive. A few days later, I had the same dream again, only now I was in a different room when I came to. It was a sort of barracks with 3 sets of bunk beds. I was in the bottom one furthest from the door. I didn't see anyone else in the beds, but the covers looked recently tossed aside. The rusted iron frame creaked as I rolled off. The halls of the space seemed a little more warped than last time. I also noticed everything was tilting in a slow rhythm. I must have been inside a tanker or other large ship. I decided to brave the hallway and turn left. I steadied myself on the wall as the ship rocked. Back then, I didn't consider where it was headed, or what it was transporting. The place was so large it could have been an army, vehicles and all. I got a sort of answer shortly after that thought. A loud, rumbling growl came from further down the hall, accompanied by a slimy, crawling sound. Big, raspy breaths. I panicked and looked for another door, but all I saw was another hall. I quickly hid in that hall and held my breath. I watched in silent fear as an amorphous shadow slowly moved past me, the squelching sounds coming from where his feet should be. I didn't dare look up. I waited for that thing to pass before peeking out. A bulbous head and moving tendrils of shadows slid down the hall, barely discernible in the dim lighting. As I rounded the corner, I stepped out and took a better look down the smaller hall I hid in. Eyes. Large, red, slanted eyes and a glistening, long claw. I ran as fast as I could, not caring about the noise I made. I was right next to that thing, and I couldn't even hear it. A few turns later, I saw a corridor of prison cells. The bars were at least 10 feet tall on some and way too short on others. I glanced at each briefly as I walked by them. The space echoed with growls, thumps, and scraping. Some bars had giant teeth behind them, others had more eyes in greater numbers, and some were broken from the inside. The floor showed signs of large somethings that had been moved across it. Was this ship carrying monsters? Why was there no crew? I didn't see any blood unless the walls were red from more than just rust. I saw a door to my right and found it unlocked. I entered and quickly slammed it shut. A sudden lurch of the ship knocked me over, and I hit my head in the heavy door. The thud echoed in the room, and I could only assume the cell corridor. I grit my teeth and held the back of my head, waiting for the echo to stop. The room slowly got brighter, and I opened my eyes. The gas mask man stared down at me, lantern in my face, raspy, heavy breath in my ears. It echoed everywhere. I remember the mask was severely scratched up and revealed small patches of pale skin. I couldn't see his eyes behind the glass holes. I held my breath and backed towards the door in vain. The man spoke slowly after a long, rough breath. His voice sounded like someone who smoked 20 packs a day.
"You're an interesting addition to our stock,"
the masked man said, stepping back, and I got a better look at the room I was in. It was an infirmary of sorts. I have been to that room many times now, and I never get used to it. The blood in that room always looked fresh. The sheets torn, the shelves knocked over. The room reeked of old wounds and stale antiseptic. The masked man sat on the only stool in the room. I'm not one of your pets, I stammered.
"Oh, I know. You're a stowaway. And not the first one."
Not the first, I thought. What is this place? How did I get here? I tried to sound intimidating. The masked man laughed hoarsely and coughed harshly. He held his chest for a moment.
"The same way you did,"
he said.
"And as to where, we transport an important resource."
A loud bang and a howl came from behind me. I jumped from the door but kept my distance from the other man. "And what is that?" I said.
"Fear is an excellent control for people,"
the large man breathed out.
"Usually we capture such creatures from out there."
He pointed to a small window behind him. I turned to look. An inky blackness outside that seemed darker than it should be possible. I couldn't see anything and tried to focus. Just then, a large orange eye abruptly pressed against the glass. I backed into the bed. The eye was as big as a dinner plate, scanning the room and stopping on me. The glowing pupil narrowed. A flash of large teeth scraped against the glass. I couldn't move. My breath quickened. It felt like pure fear was being pumped into me the more I stared. The lantern man pounded the glass with a fist and the whatever it was went away. The man laughed hoarsely.
"But the human mind,"
he said, pointing at me,
"can make horrors greater than we could ever capture."
The trenchcoat swayed heavily as the tall man slowly rose and walked to the door. The handle creaked painfully as he swung the large slab open.
"Bring us a good harvest, won't you?"
He trudged out and left the door open, cries of torment and twisted roars ringing into the room. I don't remember when I woke up or when the sounds drifted away. I remember feeling my bed and seeing sunlight through my curtains. I crept to my door and peeked out again. No rusting iron, no putrid smells. I leaned against a wall and sighed shakily. "I'm calling in sick." I took the day off to do some research into old warships and similar vessels. I went for the uncommon or declassified, or myth ones rather. Maybe there was a sunken vessel, or one not built to code and left adrift after a battle. There were ghost ships, right? Not all of them made of wood. I skimmed over articles about freight transports, old carriers, submarines, but nothing beyond stories of the battles they were used in. One article caught my eye. A few ships were used to transport sensitive supplies, but nobody had any concrete information on their cargo. They were rumored to have been part of some hush project contracted to the government. Nobody was allowed to see their inventory, but several workers and soldiers were hired onto these unknown ships. I couldn't find anything else and decided to take a bathroom break. The bathroom area was the most recent renovation to the old library, a standout marble surface in contrast to the aging wood of the rest of the building. I leaned into the men's door, and as it opened, I got a whiff of something familiar. Stale blood and rust. The flickering incandescent bulb revealed the same walls I saw in my dreams. Faint, distant wails and growls came from the open, disused stalls. I slammed the door shut, the bang rolling through the almost empty library. A few heads turned my way, and I blurted out some awkward apology before heading back to my books, and quickly back home. I kept seeing flashes of that place after that night. I would see a long, rusted hallway when going down the hall at work, my mirror reflection showing a twisted dark red storage room. The most frightening but also most revealing was last night in my apartment. I just finished entering emails. I reached for my coffee and started feeling for the mug. My hand grasped something so rough that I recoiled and looked. It was part of a large ancient metal pipe that ran from the floor to ceiling. I shuddered and looked back to my desk. My computer was gone. The table was bare and looked as if it was crumpled by a giant hand. I stood up and looked towards my kitchen, then towards my bedroom. The cupboards were empty, my room had a metal slab in the corner. The walls were dented and bent like a giant tin can, and slowly kept creeping in and warping more. I retreated to the hallway and tried to open my front door. It wouldn't budge, and in my panic, I started punching and slamming the door. "No, I am not dreaming!" I shouted. One punch landed, my knuckles hard against the rusted slate, and I held my hand in pain. The creaks and groans of the ship were overwhelming in my mind, and I could not hear myself think. "Dennis? Your door's stuck again." I opened my eyes, and there was my apartment again. The world seemed normal, just a quiet apartment. "Dennis?" The voice of my neighbor was muffled, but I recognized it. "Oh, yeah, sorry, Mrs. B," I half shouted. "I'm good. I finally got in." "Just making sure. It's been like that since I've been here." My neighbor had lived here before I moved in. She often joked about how she and the building had the same aches and pains. "Call Bob later. If he doesn't answer, I'll make him come up here." "I will. Thanks, Mrs. B." I don't think our repairman could help me with this. I looked at the spot I punched and saw a long scratch trailing down the wooden wall and peeling paint. It was a small metal plaque embossed with Crew R. Johnson, USS Pitch Black on it. That was my lead. My only lead. I searched for any old ships with that nickname and any crew with that last name. I found one vague article buried in an old blog long since shut down, but archived. Officially Unit 2564, it was an old Navy cruiser that was marked as unusable, but was rumored to have ferried fuel to small platoons. The cargo was indeed never officially listed. Only one picture of the inside, but I could tell it was the same long metal hull, but it wasn't twisted. It wasn't warped or destroyed. Just this new metal hull. Johnson was mentioned among the engineers in the crew roster. It was reported as lost at sea, and nobody survived. But it made sense. The ship harvested things that we could never fathom, human fears that we all put far back in our minds. War needed fear to control people, and the ships never stopped. That was over 50 years ago. I then had the stupid idea to confront the man with this knowledge. I would call him the name I found, and I would tell him I knew about the ship and threaten to report him or something. Maybe he would release me from that place. It was a fat chance and I knew it, but I was taking it. I went to bed with the flashlight, some batteries, and a camera that night. I hoped the items would come with me into the dream. Hoped. Exhaustion took over quickly, and after a brief time, I felt the familiar discomfort of cold, bumpy metal beneath my head. I sat up and looked around, finding myself in the infirmary again. Reaching for the flashlight, I felt a single battery near my hip. I looked down to see a trail of batteries, leading to my flashlight near the door. My camera was nowhere nearby. I quickly gathered the batteries and turned on the flashlight. The same long, warped hull was there to greet me. The smell of rust and stale air, now tinged with something new. A trail of crimson red was painted through the hall to my left, and then to my right. Something dark and long-clawed scraped at the metal. Painful screeches echoed in the chamber, and I covered my ears to no avail. That blood was fresh. I might not be the only one here. I braced myself for the painful sounds and turned the light to the brightest setting, covering the lens with one hand as I ran at whatever it was to my right. It turned to look at me as I got within a few steps, and I unblocked the light. Its face looked like an amalgamation of teeth and old flesh in all the wrong places. There were no eyes. For a split second, I thought the flashlight would have no effect, but the creature still screamed a sound that I still can't put into words. It hurt me aurally just as I hurt it with my light. The shadow rushed away with wet thuds and scrapes across the rough metal. I watched the semi-formless thing turn a corner before I slowly opened the door it was in front of. I met with some resistance, but I got it open. Another infirmary room. Same setup as before. The trenchcoat man was here, leaning against a desk, clutching his side, coughing through his gas mask.
Didn't think you'd be back here, huh?
He tried to laugh, but it only made him cough more. You were an engineer, right? Johnson. Several wars ago, I said. The man leaned back and looked at me.
Haven't heard that name in a while.
He sounded slightly defeated. I closed the door and locked it. I know I locked myself in with him, but he didn't seem in any shape to fight back. The lantern burned low next to him.
Fancy light you got there,
the man said with amusement. I turned the light away. What happened here? It's been at least 50 years. And why drag me here? I demanded.
Fear,
Johnson said.
We were part of a big job. We had methods of harvesting human nightmares and things beyond our world.
He adjusted himself to a slouched standing position.
We put them in cells and vats. Used them to control whoever we were ordered to.
He looked at the stained bed.
Didn't tell us we wouldn't all survive. Or kill each other. Or never die till the job was done.
He pointed to me slowly.
You got here like we did. Ship chose you for the job. Lucky you. Seems you're only part-time.
So I'm here every night? Forever? I asked.
One last delivery,
Johnson groaned.
One last job, and we're all free of this old beauty.
He banged the walls with a fist. A low thud echoed lazily in the room. Then another series of thumps came from the door. I jumped back and shone my light at the slab of metal.
Won't do you good all the time,
Johnson said. The door started bending inward from the impacts. I was terrified. I pressed against a cupboard as the door bent in more. A last-second idea came to mind. I tossed the flashlight to the coated man and took the lantern from the floor.
What are you?
Johnson started before catching the flashlight. The door fissured down the middle as a large, sharp claws reached through, straining to push it apart. I threw the lantern at the widening gap. It shattered on impact, the oil catching fire and, as I hoped, burning whatever it was on the other side. Fire spread impossibly quick, blinding the room in heat and light. The creature shrieked and ran off, light of the fire moving down the hall with the screams.
That was my only lamp, you know,
Johnson said, slightly annoyed. I'll bring another flashlight, I said flatly. You want to get this last job done or not? The engineer looked sideways at me.
She picked a real go-getter.
I picked up a rusty pipe nearby and started pulling on the door. It so bent it barely moved, a high-pitched squeal scraping across the ground. Keep that flashlight on me, I shouted. Johnson limped up behind me and pointed at the big beam ahead.
You know you could get killed, right?
He said. I shoved the door against the wall after it fully opened. Good luck with that, I said to nobody. Roars and snarls echoed in the darkness, audibly distorting and twisting in the halls. To this day, I get to see any sign of an end on that voyage, but every night, and some days, I find myself on the ancient vessel. I always pack a knife and a flashlight on me from now on, even slept with a gun, and when it finally came through, I left it in the infirmary. That world seems to copy things I leave there. Not food, sadly, but I don't seem to get hungry there. And I'm not a quitter. Not leaving the old engineer trapped there either. Me and him worked together on this job. We're the last ones left. I'm seeing it through. Probably going to take me years, but oh well. Pardon me, I'm seeing some rusted metal and smelling something very familiar through my closet door. I got a second job to go to.